The grease under his fingernails was the first thing Emma Ellis noticed about the man crouched beside her ancient sedan, his hands moving with practiced confidence as he examined her flat tire in the fading afternoon light. "You really drove on this for a while, didn't you?" His voice carried amusement rather than judgment, and when he glanced up at her, his green eyes caught the late September sun in a way that made her breath catch unexpectedly. Emma wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself, suddenly self-conscious in her paint-splattered jeans and old college sweatshirt. "I thought I could make it home. Clearly, I was wrong." He stood, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days, and she had to tilt her head back slightly to meet his gaze. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it too many times throughout the day. The name embroidered on his navy work shirt read Pierce. "The tires shot, but your rim took some damage too. Where were you trying to get to?" "Just across town. I teach art at Riverside Elementary, and I was heading home after staying late to prepare for tomorrow's class." Emma gestured helplessly at her car. "This isn't exactly in my budget right now." Pierce walked around her vehicle, assessing the situation with the kind of thoroughness that suggested he actually cared about the outcome. "Tell you what, my shop is just 2 blocks from here. I can tow you there, get you fixed up properly. Won't charge you the full price because honestly this car's held together with hope and duct tape anyway. No point in bankrupting yourself over it." The kindness in his offer surprised her. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He pulled out his phone. "Let me call for the tow truck. I'm Pierce Zimmerman, by the way. I own Zimmerman's Auto Repair just down on 5th Street. Emma Ellis." She shook his extended hand, noticing how warm and calloused his palm was against hers. "You really don't have to do this." "I know I don't have to, I want to." He made the call, then turned back to her. "Truck'll be here in 10. You want to wait in my shop where it's warm or stand out here in the cold?" 20 minutes later, Emma found herself sitting in the small office of Zimmerman's Auto Repair, clutching a cup of surprisingly good coffee while Pierce worked on her car in the bay beyond the glass window. The shop was clean despite the nature of the work, organized in a way that spoke to someone who took pride in what they did. Framed photos on the walls showed Pierce with various cars he'd restored, his smile genuine in each one. "He's good people," said a voice behind her. Emma turned to find an older man with silver hair and kind eyes entering the office. "Name's Frank. I've worked with Pierce for 3 years now. Never met anyone who cared more about doing right by his customers." "He seems very generous," Emma agreed, watching Pierce through the window as he maneuvered under her car. "That's one word for it. Stubborn's another. Once he decides to help someone, there's no talking him out of it." Frank chuckled. "Last week, he spent his entire Sunday helping a single mom get her minivan running. Didn't charge her a cent." Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest. In her experience, genuinely good people were rare. She dated enough men who talked a big game about kindness but never followed through to be skeptical. Yet here was Pierce, covered in grease and working on her beaten-up car without expecting anything in return. An hour passed before Pierce emerged from the bay, wiping his hands. "Good news and bad news. Good news is I got you fixed up and road safe. Bad news is this car's on its last legs. I'd give it maybe 6 months if you're lucky." Emma's shoulders sagged. "How much do I owe you?" "For the tire and the rim work. How about $100 and dinner?" She blinked. "Excuse me. The parts and labor would normally run you close to $300, but I've got some used inventory I can pull from. So I'll charge you cost for the tire, and you can buy me dinner as payment for my labor. There's a decent diner 2 blocks over. I haven't eaten since breakfast and I'm starving." He said it so matter-of-factly, as though asking strangers to dinner was a perfectly normal business transaction. "You want me to buy you dinner instead of paying you properly for fixing my car?" Emma couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. "That's the deal. Take it or leave it." But his eyes were warm, and Emma realized he was giving her an out, a way to accept his help without feeling like she was accepting charity. "Fine. But I'm a teacher. We're talking diner food, not steaks. Diner food is exactly what I had in mind." The Bluebird Diner was the kind of place that had been serving the same menu since the 1970s, with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner that actually worked. Emma slid into a booth while Pierce excused himself to wash up properly. When he returned, his hands were clean and he'd changed into a plain gray t-shirt that showed off his arms in a way that made Emma momentarily forget how to read the menu. "So, art teacher," he said after they'd ordered. "They're food burgers and fries for both. Nothing fancy." "What made you choose that?" Emma wrapped her hands around her water glass. "I grew up in a house where creativity wasn't exactly encouraged. My parents are both accountants, very practical, very numbers-focused. They wanted me to do something sensible with my life. But I fell in love with painting when I was 8 years old, and I never fell out of love with it. Teaching lets me share that with kids who might need that creative outlet." "That's really cool." Pierce leaned forward, genuinely interested. "Do you still paint? For yourself, I mean." "When I can afford supplies." She laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Turns out teaching elementary school doesn't exactly pay for expensive hobbies. Most of my money goes to rent and basic necessities. The art supplies I buy are usually for my classroom." Their food arrived, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence. Emma studied Pierce when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something about him that didn't quite fit, though she couldn't put her finger on it. The way he carried himself had a confidence that seemed at odds with someone who worked with his hands for a living. Not that there was anything wrong with being a mechanic, but Pierce had an almost aristocratic bearing when he moved, a natural authority that suggested he was used to being in charge. "What about you?" she asked. "How does someone end up owning an auto shop?" Pierce took a long drink of his Coke. "I've always been good with my hands. My dad taught me about cars when I was young, how they worked, how to fix them. I liked the idea of taking something broken and making it whole again. Seemed honest, real work that mattered." "Do your parents still live around here?" Something flickered across his face, too quick for Emma to identify. "My dad passed away 5 years ago, cancer. My mom lives upstate now. We talk a few times a week." "I'm sorry about your father." "Thanks. He was a good man. Taught me a lot about integrity, about treating people right no matter who they were or what they had." Pierce pushed a fry around his plate. "He would have liked you." The comment was so unexpected, so genuine, that Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You don't even know me. I know you're an art teacher who stays late to prepare for her students. I know you drove your car on a flat tire because you couldn't afford to stop. I know you're proud enough to be uncomfortable accepting help, but kind enough to agree to dinner with a stranger covered in grease. That tells me plenty." Emma met his gaze across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't quite attraction, though that was certainly present. It was recognition, a sense of seeing and being seen that she'd rarely experienced with anyone. "This is probably the strangest business transaction I've ever been part of," she said softly. Pierce grinned. "Good. Strange is better than boring." They talked for another hour, about everything and nothing. Emma learned that Pierce had a younger sister who was a veterinarian in Portland, that he loved old westerns and couldn't stand horror movies, that he volunteered at a youth center teaching kids basic car maintenance. Pierce learned that Emma was an only child, that she'd moved to this city 3 years ago for the teaching job, that she dreamed of one day having her own art studio where she could teach adult classes in the evenings. When Pierce insisted on paying for dinner despite their arrangement, Emma didn't fight him too hard. Something told her that Pierce Zimmerman was the kind of man who needed to take care of people, and fighting that would only frustrate them both. "Let me drive you home," he said as they stepped out into the cool night air. "Make sure your car's running smooth. You've done enough for one day." "Emma." He said her name like it meant something. "Let me drive you home." So she did. Her apartment was in an older building on the east side of town, nothing fancy but clean and safe. Pierce walked her to her door, hands in his pockets, and Emma realized she didn't want the evening to end. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. The car, dinner, the conversation. It's been a really long time since I met someone genuinely kind. Can I call you?" The question was direct, no games or pretense. "I'd like to see you again, not as a mechanic and customer, but as Pierce and Emma." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "I'd like that." She gave him her number, and he programmed it into his phone with the kind of careful attention he probably gave to engine repairs. Then he surprised her by taking her hand, lifting it to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Emma Ellis." "Good night, Pierce Zimmerman." She watched him walk down the hallway, noting the confident set of his shoulders, the easy grace of his movements. When she finally closed her door and leaned against it, Emma couldn't stop smiling. The text came the next morning while Emma was helping her second graders mix primary colors. "Pierce, good morning. Hope your car is still running. Dinner this weekend. Somewhere nicer than the Bluebird this time, Emma. Car is perfect. Dinner sounds great. But I'm buying this time since I still owe you for the repair work. Pierce. Not how this works, but we can negotiate over dinner. Saturday at 7, Emma. It's a date. And it was. Saturday evening found Emma standing in front of her closet trying to decide what one wore to dinner with a mechanic who kissed hands like a gentleman and had eyes that seemed to see straight through her usual defenses. She settled on a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, paired with a cardigan because October evenings were getting chilly. Pierce picked her up right on time, and Emma's breath actually caught when she opened the door. He'd cleaned up beautifully, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that fit him perfectly. His hair was still slightly damp from a shower, and he smelled like soap and something woodsy. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe it. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He took her to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in the historic district, the kind of place that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. The food was incredible, and the conversation flowed even easier than it had at the diner. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in months, telling Pierce stories about her students and their hilarious interpretations of famous artworks. "One of my kids told me that Starry Night was actually about a wizard casting spells in the sky," she said, twirling pasta around her fork. And honestly, I couldn't even argue with that interpretation. It was too perfect. Pierce laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Kids see things adults forget to look for." "Exactly. That's why I love teaching them. They haven't learned to doubt their creativity yet." Emma paused, studying him across the candlelit table. "You're different than I expected." "Different how?" "I don't know. Most guys I've dated were always trying to impress me, talking about their jobs or their cars or their plans to make money. But you actually listen when I talk. You ask questions like you care about the answers." "That's because I do care." Pierce reached across the table, taking her hand. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I find you fascinating, Emma. The way you talk about your students, the way you light up when you discuss art. I want to know everything about you." It should have been too much. Too intense for a second date, but somehow it wasn't. Somehow it felt exactly right. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Pierce fell into an easy rhythm. He'd stop by the school sometimes during lunch, bringing her coffee and sandwiches when he knew she'd been too busy to pack anything. She'd visit his shop in the evenings, sitting in the office and grading papers while he finished up work, enjoying the proximity even when they weren't talking. Frank, Pierce's employee, took to teasing Pierce mercilessly about being smitten. Emma would catch them sometimes, Frank saying something that made Pierce blush and shake his head, a smile playing at his lips. "He's different since he met you," Frank told her one evening when Pierce had run out to grab parts. "Lighter somehow, like he's finally letting himself be happy." The comment stuck with Emma. She'd noticed it too, the way Pierce sometimes seemed to carry a weight he wouldn't talk about. There were moments when he'd get a phone call and step away, his expression serious, his voice dropping to a tone she couldn't quite hear. He'd come back and be himself again, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her. She tried not to let it bother her. Everyone had their private concerns, their personal business. But as she and Pierce grew closer, as stolen kisses became longer embraces and casual dates became intimate evenings at her apartment or his surprisingly nice house across town, Emma found herself wanting to know all of him, not just the parts he chose to show. It was a cold Friday evening in late October when things shifted. Emma had invited Pierce over for dinner, attempting to cook something more ambitious than her usual pasta and sauce. The chicken was slightly dry and the vegetables a bit overcooked, but Pierce ate everything with apparent enjoyment, complimenting her efforts. They were doing dishes together, Pierce washing while Emma dried when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his whole body tensed. "I need to take this," he said, already moving toward her bedroom for privacy. Emma tried not to eavesdrop, she really did. But her apartment was small and Pierce's voice carried when he was agitated. "No, I told you I'm not coming back yet. Handle it yourself." "You're the COO, Marcus. That's literally your job." Silence. "I don't care what the board thinks. They'll survive another quarter without me breathing down their necks." More silence, longer this time. "Because I'm finally living my own life for once, that's why." Pierce's voice dropped, but Emma could still hear the frustration. "Tell them I'll be back when I'm ready. Until then, do your job and stop calling me unless it's an emergency." Emma heard him end the call, heard him take several deep breaths. When he emerged from the bedroom, she was standing in the kitchen holding a dish towel, her expression carefully neutral. "Sorry about that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Work stuff. Must be some serious work stuff for a mechanic shop." Pierce's eyes met hers, and Emma saw the moment he realized she'd heard at least part of the conversation. Something like resignation crossed his face, followed by what might have been relief. "We should talk," he said quietly. They sat on her worn couch, the one Emma had bought secondhand 3 years ago. Pierce took her hands, his grip gentle but firm, like he was afraid she might pull away. "I haven't lied to you," he started, "but I haven't told you everything either, and you deserve the whole truth." Emma's heart was pounding. "Okay. My full name is Pierce Nathaniel Zimmerman. My father was Thomas Zimmerman, founder and CEO of Zimmerman Enterprises. It's a multinational corporation worth about $12 billion. When my father died 5 years ago, I inherited his position and his fortune." The words hung in the air between them. Emma stared at Pierce, trying to reconcile the man in front of her, the one who fixed cars and ate at diners, with the image of a billionaire CEO. "I don't understand." "The shop, the work, why would you? Because I was drowning." Pierce's voice cracked slightly. "After my dad died, I spent 3 years running the company, living up to everyone's expectations, being Thomas Zimmerman's son instead of just Pierce. I sat in boardrooms and made decisions that affected thousands of people, and I was good at it. But I was miserable. I felt like I was disappearing into this role everyone expected me to play. Emma's mind was racing, but she forced herself to listen, to understand. 6 months ago, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my COO and the board that I was taking an extended leave. I moved to this city where nobody knew who I was, bought the shop because I genuinely love working on cars, and for the first time since my father died, I felt like I could breathe. He squeezed her hands. And then I met you and everything got even better. Why didn't you tell me before, at first? Because it was nice to have someone see me as just Pierce, not as Pierce Zimmerman, billionaire. And then as we got closer, I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at me differently, treat me differently. Afraid you'd think everything between us was a lie. His green eyes searched hers desperately. But it wasn't a lie, Emma. Who I am with you, that's the most real I've been in years. Emma pulled her hands away, needing space to think. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city lights. Behind her, she could feel Pierce's tension, his fear. So the shop, Frank, all of that, it's real. You actually own it and work there. Yes. I bought it with my own money, hired Frank because he's a great mechanic who needed a job. Everything about that part of my life is genuine. And the phone call tonight. Someone wants you to come back. The board's been pushing. There are decisions they want me to make, directions for the company. Marcus, my coup, is handling things, but some people think the company needs its actual CEO. Pierce stood but didn't approach her. I haven't decided what I'm going to do. Part of me knows I have responsibilities, people depending on me, but another part of me loves this life I've built here. Emma turned to face him. This is a lot to process. I know. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. If you need time, if you need space, I understand. But Emma, please believe me when I say that what we have is real. My feelings for you are real. You're not some distraction or escape. You're the first person in 5 years who's made me feel like myself again. She studied his face. This man she'd fallen for over cheap diner food and greasy car repairs. The money didn't change the way he'd listened to her stories about teaching, didn't change the gentle way he kissed her forehead when he thought she was sleeping, didn't change the fact that he'd seen her, really seen her, from that very first day. I need you to answer one question honestly, she said. Anything. That first day when you fixed my car, was that genuine kindness, or were you trying to buy your way into my life? Pierce's answer was immediate and firm. Genuine kindness. Emma, I would have helped anyone in that situation. But the moment you looked at me with those blue eyes and made a joke about your car being held together with hope and duct tape, I was a goner. Everything after that, every moment we've spent together, I did because I wanted to be near you. Not because of money or manipulation, but because you make me happy. Emma walked back to the couch and sat down. Pierce joined her, maintaining a careful distance that broke her heart a little. I'm not going to lie, she said slowly. This is overwhelming. You're a billionaire, Pierce. That's not exactly something you casually absorb, but I'm also not going to run away screaming just because you have money. Hope flickered in his eyes. You're not. Why would I? You're still the same person who spent an hour fixing my ancient car, who brings me coffee during lunch, who listens when I talk about my students' artwork like it's the most important thing in the world. The money is just a fact about you, like your height or your terrible taste in movies. Hey, Westerns are classic cinema. They're mostly men staring at each other for 2 hours. Emma felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. I do have questions, though, a lot of them. Ask me anything. They talked for hours. Pierce explained the nature of his company. various tech and manufacturing interests his father had built over decades. He talked about the pressure of inheriting not just money but legacy, about the weight of thousands of employees depending on his leadership. He showed her pictures from his old life, charity galas and business meetings, Pierce in expensive suits looking handsome and utterly miserable. "I don't want to go back to being that person," he admitted as dawn started to lighten her windows. "But I also know I can't hide forever. Eventually, I'll have to figure out how to be Pierce Zimmerman the CEO in a way that doesn't destroy Pierce Zimmerman the person." Emma, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, leaned her head on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out. You think I'm letting you deal with this alone? I'm a teacher. I'm excellent at problem solving and dealing with complicated situations." She tilted her face up to his. "I'm not running, Pierce. I'm choosing to stay, so you're stuck with me." He kissed her then, deep and grateful and full of relief. When they finally pulled apart, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I've been falling in love with you since that first dinner at the Bluebird. I love you too, even if you are secretly a billionaire with terrible taste in cinema." The next few weeks brought adjustments. Pierce introduced Emma to Marcus Chen, his COO and apparently one of his closest friends. Marcus was sharp and efficient, but warmed up when he saw how happy Pierce was. He pulled Emma aside at one point and said, "Thank you for giving him a reason to smile again. We've all been worried about him." Emma also learned that Pierce's surprisingly nice house was actually a fairly modest place by his standards. He'd deliberately chosen something simple, avoiding the mansion-style homes he could easily afford. His wealth was evident in small ways: the quality of his kitchen appliances, the original artwork on his walls, the vintage car collection in his garage, but he didn't flaunt it. "I don't need much," he explained when Emma asked about his lifestyle choices. "After my dad died and I had access to unlimited money, I realized pretty quickly that expensive things don't make you happy. Meaningful work and genuine connections do." They established a new normal. Pierce continued working at the shop because he genuinely loved it. But he also started taking calls from his company, slowly re-engaging with his responsibilities. He attended video conferences from his home office, Emma sometimes sitting nearby grading papers while he discussed quarterly projections and market expansions. Emma met his mother, Catherine, when she came to visit in November. Catherine was elegant and warm, with Pierce's same green eyes and a smile that suggested she knew more than she let on. "I'm so glad Pierce found you," Catherine told Emma over lunch while Pierce was taking a business call. "After Thomas died, I watched my son disappear into responsibility and grief. When he told me he was leaving the company to work in an auto shop, I thought he'd lost his mind, but he found himself instead, and then he found you." "He found me first, technically," Emma said. "I had a flat tire." Catherine laughed. "However it happened, I'm grateful. Pierce needs someone who sees him for who he really is, not what he can provide. Thomas and I had that kind of love. It's rare and precious." The holidays approached, bringing new complications. Pierce was expected at various company functions, charity galas and holiday parties where his absence would be noticed. He asked Emma to accompany him, and she agreed despite her nervousness about entering his world of wealth and privilege. Their first event was a charity auction benefiting children's hospitals. Emma wore a dress Pierce had insisted on buying for her, a deep emerald green that made her feel like someone else entirely. Pierce wore a tuxedo that should have been illegal, making Emma momentarily forget how to form complete sentences. "You're staring," he murmured as they entered the glittering ballroom. "You look really good in a tux. It's distracting." His hand tightened on her waist. "You're the most beautiful woman here. I'm going to spend the whole evening fighting the urge to forget this party and take you home." The event was overwhelming at first. Emma had never been around this much concentrated wealth and power. But Pierce never left her side, introducing her to everyone as Emma Ellis, the woman I love, with such pride in his voice that she couldn't feel out of place for long. She watched him work the room, shaking hands and making conversation, and saw the mask he'd talked about. This was Pierce Zimmerman, the CEO, charming and confident and slightly distant. But every time he looked at her, the mask slipped and she saw her Pierce underneath, the man who fixed cars and brought her coffee. $50,000, Pierce said suddenly, his paddle raised. Emma turned to see what he was bidding on. On the auction stage was a complete art studio setup, professional-grade easels, paints, canvases, everything an artist could dream of having. "Pierce, that's too much," she whispered. "It's for charity," he said innocently. "And if I happen to win and decide to donate it to a certain elementary school art teacher, well, that's just coincidence." "60,000, called another bidder. 75,000. Pierce didn't hesitate. Emma grabbed his arm. "Pierce Zimmerman, you are not spending $75,000 on art supplies for me. Watch me." His eyes were sparkling with mischief. "Besides, technically I'm spending it on the children's hospital. You getting the art studio is just a happy bonus." He won the bid at $80,000. Emma wanted to be mad at his extravagance, but watching him grin with boyish delight made it impossible. This was who he was, someone who used his wealth to make people happy, who found joy in giving rather than having. Later, as they danced to a slow jazz standard, Emma said, "Thank you for the art supplies, but also for bringing me tonight, for including me in this part of your life. Thank you for being willing to be included. I know this world can be intimidating." Pierce pulled her closer. "But you handled it like you belonged here all along." "I don't belong here, Pierce. I'm a teacher who lives in a tiny apartment and drives a car held together with hope. You belong wherever I am, and I belong wherever you are. Everything else is just details." December brought a cold snap and a conversation that had been building for weeks. They were at Pierce's house. Emma curled up on his couch with hot chocolate while a fire crackled in the fireplace. Pierce was staring into the flames, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about the company," he said finally. "About what I want to do." Emma set down her mug. "Okay. I can't walk away completely. It wouldn't be fair to the employees or to my father's legacy. But I also can't go back to the way things were before. I was losing myself in that life." He turned to face her. "What if I restructured things? Promoted Marcus to full CEO, kept myself as chairman of the board. I'd still be involved in major decisions, but the day-to-day operations would be his responsibility. Would that work? Would Marcus be okay with that?" "I talked to him yesterday. He's thrilled. He's been essentially doing the job anyway these past months, and he's good at it, better than me in some ways." Pierce moved to sit beside her. "It would mean I could keep the shop, keep this life I've built. I'd have to travel sometimes for board meetings and important company events, but my home would be here, with you." Emma's heart swelled. "You've really thought this through." "I want a life that includes both parts of who I am. The guy who fixes cars and the guy who runs a company. And more than anything, I want a life that includes you. So I'm choosing the option that makes all of that possible." She kissed him, tasting chocolate and possibility. "I think that sounds perfect. And for the record, I don't care if you're a mechanic or a CEO or both. I just care that you're happy." "I'm happiest with you," he said simply. The restructuring took a few weeks to finalize, but by January it was official. Marcus Chen was the new CEO of Zimmerman Enterprises, with Pierce remaining as chairman. The business press had a field day with the announcement. But Pierce handled the attention with grace, giving a few carefully worded interviews about wanting to pursue other interests while maintaining his family's legacy. What he didn't tell the press was that his other interests included spending his mornings working on cars, his afternoons in video conferences with his executive team, and his evenings with a kindergarten art teacher who had completely stolen his heart. Emma's life changed too, though more subtly. The art studio Pierce had won at the auction transformed her classroom, giving her students access to materials and tools she'd never dreamed of providing. She started an after-school art program that quickly became one of the school's most popular offerings. Pierce insisted on paying off her student loans, an argument they'd had repeatedly until Emma finally agreed on the condition that she could contribute to his household expenses once they moved in together, which they did in February, choosing to split their time between her apartment, which she refused to give up because she'd worked hard for it, and his house, which had better space for both of them to work. It was a March evening, surprisingly warm for early spring, when Pierce suggested they take a walk. They ended up at the park near Emma's school, following paths that wound between budding trees and early flowers. Pierce seemed nervous, his hand tight around hers, and Emma was about to ask what was wrong when he stopped at a small bridge over a pond. "This is where I come sometimes," he said, "when I need to think. I was here the day before I met you, actually, trying to figure out if I'd made a huge mistake leaving my company, wondering if I was being selfish or stupid or both." "Pierce, let me finish." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "And then the next day, I met this beautiful woman with a flat tire and paint-splattered jeans, and everything made sense. Every choice I'd made, every risk I'd taken, it all led me to that moment. It led me to you." Emma's breath caught as Pierce dropped to one knee. "Emma Ellis, you've made me happier than I ever thought possible. You see me, all of me, the mechanic and the billionaire and the man underneath it all. You didn't run when you learned the truth. You stayed and you chose me, and I choose you every single day." He pulled out a ring box, opening it to reveal a stunning diamond that caught the fading sunlight. "Will you marry me?" Emma was crying, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you." Pierce slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while they both laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her forget they were in a public park. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you so much." "I love you too, my humble mechanic billionaire." They were married in June, a small ceremony in the garden of Catherine's home upstate. Emma's parents attended, still slightly bewildered by their daughter's choice of husband but unable to deny how happy she was. Frank was Pierce's best man, giving a speech about how Pierce had changed since meeting Emma, becoming more himself than Frank had ever seen him. Marcus attended with his wife, telling Emma that he owed her a debt of gratitude for keeping Pierce sane enough to make the chairman transition work. Pierce's sister flew in from Portland with her husband, embracing Emma like they'd known each other for years. But the moment that mattered most was when Pierce stood at the altar and watched Emma walk down the aisle toward him, her face radiant with joy, her dress simple but perfect. His eyes were wet with tears as she joined him, taking his hands in hers. "Hello, husband," she whispered. "Hello, wife." The officiant cleared his throat. "We haven't gotten to that part yet." Laughter rippled through their guests, but Pierce and Emma only had eyes for each other. When they finally spoke their vows, Emma promising to love him through business crises and car troubles, Pierce promising to support her dreams and always bring her coffee, there wasn't a dry eye watching. Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy, Pierce showing Emma the art she'd only ever seen in textbooks. They stood in front of the Sistine Chapel, Emma's hand in his, tears streaming down her face at the beauty of it all. "Thank you," she said, "for making my dreams come true." "Thank you for making my life worth living," he responded. They returned home to news that Zimmerman Enterprises had its most profitable quarter in company history under Marcus's leadership. Pierce took the whole executive team out to celebrate, introducing Emma as his wife with so much pride that she blushed. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Pierce worked at the shop 3 days a week, handled company business 2 days a week, and kept weekends sacred for Emma. She continued teaching, finding joy in her students' creativity and growth. They hosted dinner parties where billionaire CEOs sat next to elementary school teachers, everyone mixing and laughing and forming unlikely friendships. Emma's after-school art program expanded, Pierce quietly funding a scholarship program that gave underprivileged kids access to art supplies and instruction. He never wanted recognition for it, content to let Emma have the spotlight as her program won awards and recognition from the school district. A year into their marriage, Emma found herself standing in the bathroom of their home, staring at a positive pregnancy test. She walked out to find Pierce in his garage, working on a vintage Mustang, and simply held up the test. Pierce dropped his wrench. Are we're pregnant." He had her in his arms in seconds, lifting her off her feet and spinning carefully, before setting her down and placing his hand on her still flat stomach with such tenderness that Emma started crying again. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We're having a baby," she confirmed. Their daughter was born on a snowy February morning, arriving 3 weeks early and stealing their hearts immediately. They named her Catherine Grace Zimmerman, after Pierce's mother and the grace that had brought them together. Pierce was a natural father, changing diapers and handling midnight feedings with the same calm competence he brought to engine repairs and board meetings. Emma would wake sometimes to find him in the nursery, holding Katie and telling her stories about her grandmother, about how her parents met, about all the love waiting for her in the world. Emma's students made welcome signs and drew pictures for baby Katie, decorating an entire wall of the nursery with their artwork. Frank brought by a stuffed teddy bear wearing tiny mechanic overalls. Marcus and his wife gifted a trust fund that made Emma's head spin, but she'd learned to accept Pierce's world and the generosity that came with it. Catherine Sr. visited often, doting on her granddaughter and often staying with Pierce and Emma to give them breaks. She and Emma had grown close, Catherine sharing stories of Thomas and Pierce's childhood, Emma sharing her hopes and dreams for Katie's future. 2 years later, their son arrived, Thomas Pierce Zimmerman, named for his grandfather. Tommy was colicky and demanding where Katie had been easy, but Pierce handled it with patience and humor, walking the floors at night so Emma could sleep, singing off-key lullabies that somehow calmed their son. The shop thrived, Pierce hiring more mechanics and expanding the business. He started a program training at-risk youth in auto repair, giving kids opportunities they might not otherwise have had. Emma joked that he was building an empire of kindness, one fixed car and trained student at a time. Zimmerman Enterprises continued to grow under Marcus's leadership, but Pierce remained an active chairman, making decisions that prioritized employee welfare and sustainable growth over pure profit. He endowed scholarships, funded research initiatives, and generally used his wealth and position to make positive change. But his favorite moments were still the simple ones. Sunday mornings with Emma and the kids, making pancakes and telling jokes. Evening walks through the park where he'd proposed. Watching Emma paint in the studio he'd built her at home, her face peaceful and focused. teaching Katie how to hold a wrench properly while Tommy looked on from his carrier. On their 5th anniversary, they returned to the Bluebird Diner where it had all started. The kids were with Catherine for the evening, giving Pierce and Emma a rare night alone. They slid into the same booth they'd sat in that first night, ordering the same burgers and fries. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked, stealing one of his fries. Choosing this life instead of going back to the company full-time, Pierce reached across the table, taking her hand just like he had 5 years ago. "Not for a single second. You know what I regret? All those years I wasted being miserable because I thought I had to be someone I wasn't. You gave me permission to be myself, Emma. You saw me when I was just a mechanic covered in grease, and you loved me. Then you learned I was a billionaire and loved me anyway. That's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. I didn't give you permission to be yourself. You were already yourself. I just recognized it." Emma smiled. "And for the record, I'd choose you 1,000 times over, the humble mechanic who fixed my car and stole my heart. I'm not that humble anymore. I married way out of my league. You're a billionaire CEO. I'm a teacher who barely makes 30,000 a year. I think you're confused about who married out of whose league. You change lives every day, Emma. You teach kids to see beauty and create art and express themselves. You've built programs that serve hundreds of students. You made me believe I could have everything I wanted instead of choosing between the different parts of myself." Pierce raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles like he had that first night. "You're my league, my world, my everything." Emma felt the familiar warmth bloom in her chest, the same feeling she'd had watching him work on her car that September afternoon. "I love you, Pierce Zimmerman. My mechanic, my billionaire, my husband, my heart. I love you too, Emma Zimmerman, forever." They finished their dinner and drove home to relieve Catherine from babysitting duty. Katie was asleep, but Tommy was still awake, and Pierce scooped him up, walking him around the house while Emma checked on their daughter. Later, with both kids asleep, they stood in the doorway of the nursery, Pierce's arm around Emma's waist, both of them watching their children breathe. "We made this," Emma whispered. "This beautiful life. Best thing I ever built," Pierce agreed. The years continued to unfold in a tapestry of ordinary moments and extraordinary love. Katie started kindergarten at Emma's school, proudly telling everyone that her mommy was a teacher and her daddy fixed cars and ran a company. Tommy followed 3 years later, just as confident and twice as mischievous. Pierce taught both children about cars and responsibility, and using privilege to help others. Emma taught them about creativity and kindness, and seeing beauty in unexpected places. Together, they built a family rooted in love and respect, where billionaire status was just a fact, like having brown hair or being tall, not a defining characteristic. The shop became a community fixture, Pierce known for his fair prices and generous heart. He still worked there several days a week, still got grease under his fingernails, still found satisfaction in fixing what was broken. But he also attended board meetings and made strategic decisions, and ensured his father's legacy continued to grow in meaningful ways. Emma's art program expanded beyond her school, becoming a district-wide initiative that brought creative instruction to thousands of kids. She published articles about arts education, spoke at conferences, became a voice for the importance of creativity in childhood development. Pierce attended every speech, every panel, watching his wife shine with the same pride he'd felt that first night at the Bluebird. On their 10th anniversary, Pierce surprised Emma with a gallery showing of her paintings. She'd continued to create over the years, stealing moments between teaching and parenting to express herself on canvas. Pierce had quietly collected her work, had it professionally framed, and arranged for a showing at a prestigious downtown gallery. Emma stood in the gallery surrounded by her art, overwhelmed by the turnout. Her students came with their parents. Frank and the mechanics from the shop came. Marcus and the Zimmerman Enterprises executive team came. And at the center of it all stood Pierce with Katie and Tommy, the three of them beaming with pride. "You did this," Emma said, gesturing at the crowd, the art, the unbelievable reality of seeing her work displayed professionally. "You did this," Pierce corrected. "You created every piece of art here. I just made sure people could see how talented you are." Several pieces sold that night, Emma's first real income from her painting. She donated the money to her art scholarship program, the circle of creativity and support continuing. As their children grew, Pierce and Emma grew with them, learning and adapting and always choosing each other. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about parenting and priorities and how much of Pierce's wealth to use versus save. But they worked through every conflict with respect and communication, never letting anger fester, always remembering why they'd chosen each other in the first place. Katie decided at 12 that she wanted to be an engineer, fascinated by how things worked. Pierce set up a workshop for her, teaching her everything he knew about mechanics and systems. Emma encouraged her daughter's analytical mind while also ensuring she maintained creative outlets. Tommy at 9 was all about art, following in his mother's footsteps with a natural talent that astounded his teachers. Pierce supported this just as enthusiastically, funding supplies and classes and sitting for hours while Tommy painted portraits of their family. "We really lucked out with these kids," Pierce said one evening, watching Katie help Tommy with his math homework while simultaneously explaining mechanical advantage using pencils and rulers. "Luck nothing. They're amazing because they have parents who love them and each other." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. "They're growing up watching what real partnership looks like. I hope they find what we have someday, this kind of love, this kind of life. They will. We're teaching them to see people for who they really are, not what they appear to be or what they have. Just like I saw you that day with your grease-stained hands and kind eyes." Pierce pulled Emma closer. "Best flat tire I ever fixed. Best breakdown I ever had." The mechanic shop eventually expanded to 3 locations, Pierce training and promoting from within, creating opportunities for people who needed them. Zimmerman Enterprises continued to thrive, becoming known as one of the most employee-friendly corporations in the country. Pierce split his time between both ventures, finding fulfillment in the balance he'd created. Emma eventually became the district's art education coordinator, a position created specifically for her after her programs showed measurable improvements in student engagement and academic performance. She still taught 1 class a day because she loved direct contact with students, but spent the rest of her time developing curriculum and training other teachers. Their marriage remained strong through every phase and challenge. When Pierce's mother passed away peacefully in her sleep at 79, Emma held him through his grief, reminded him of Catherine's pride in the man he'd become and the family he'd built. When Emma's father suffered a heart attack and survived, Pierce was there supporting her through the fear and recovery, helping her parents understand how much she loved them despite their different approaches to life. Money was never an issue because Pierce's wealth was simply a tool they used to build the life they wanted and help others along the way. Emma never felt uncomfortable with it because Pierce never wielded it as power or status. It was just there, making things possible but not defining their relationship or their values. They traveled with the kids, showing them the world. They stayed home and played board games. They attended charity galas and school plays with equal enthusiasm. They were, by any definition happy. On their 20th anniversary, Pierce took Emma back to the spot where her car had broken down all those years ago. They stood on the side of the road, older now, grayer, marked by 20 years of life and love. "I was so lost that day," Emma said. "Driving home on a flat tire because I couldn't afford to stop, wondering if I'd made a mistake becoming a teacher, if I should have listened to my parents and done something more practical." "I was lost too," Pierce admitted. "Pretending to be someone simple because being complicated was killing me. I thought fixing cars would fix me too. Did it? No. You did. You fixed me by loving me exactly as I was, both versions of me, all the contradictions and complications." Pierce took both her hands, just like he had when he proposed. "These 20 years have been the best of my life. Every day with you is a gift. Even the hard days, the arguments and struggles and moments when we frustrated each other, especially those days. Because we always worked through them together. We never gave up on each other, on us." Pierce smiled, that same gentle smile that had captured Emma's heart 2 decades ago. "You didn't run when you learned the truth about me. You stayed, you chose me, and you've been choosing me every day since. I will never take that for granted." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears that came easier now than they had when she was young. "I love you, Pierce Zimmerman, my mechanic, my billionaire, my partner, my home. I love you, Emma Zimmerman, my teacher, my artist, my heart, my everything." They kissed there on the side of the road where their story had started. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from a chance encounter and a broken-down car. Katie graduated high school with honors and headed to MIT for engineering. Tommy chose art school in New York, his portfolio stunning enough to earn him a full scholarship that he insisted on taking despite his father's wealth. Both children had learned the value of working for their achievements, of earning rather than simply having. Pierce semi-retired at 55, handing over his chairman position to someone younger while maintaining an advisory role. He spent more time at the shop, mentoring the next generation of mechanics, and more time with Emma as she moved into full retirement from the school district. They bought a small cabin by a lake, spending summers there painting and reading and watching sunsets. They traveled when they wanted, stayed home when they preferred. They became grandparents when Katie had twins and again when Tommy and his wife had a daughter. Pierce taught his grandchildren about cars and kindness. Emma taught them about art and seeing beauty everywhere. Their love story became something their children told their own kids, about how a flat tire brought two people together, how honesty and trust built something lasting, how choosing each other every single day was the real secret to forever. And through it all, on random weekends, Pierce and Emma would still go to the Bluebird Diner, slide into that same booth, and share burgers and fries while talking about everything and nothing. The diner changed ownership 3 times over the years, but the booth remained, and so did their tradition. "Best first date I ever had," Emma said during one of these visits, when they were both silver-haired and comfortable in their own skins. "Best business transaction I ever made," Pierce agreed, his green eyes still sparkling with the same light that had caught her attention so many years ago. "You mean when you fixed my car in exchange for dinner? I mean when I met you and gained everything that mattered." Pierce reached across the table one more time, taking her hand like he'd done 1,000 times before, like he'd do 1,000 times more. "You're still the best thing that ever happened to me, Emma. Every single day, you're the best thing." And Emma, looking at her husband of decades, her partner in every sense of the word, knew exactly what he meant. Because he was her best thing too, had been since that September afternoon when a mechanic with kind eyes had stopped to help a teacher with a flat tire and changed both their lives forever. Their story wasn't about a billionaire hiding his identity or a woman discovering wealth. It was about two people finding each other, seeing each other truly and choosing love over fear, honesty over pretense, partnership over everything else. It was about building a life based on shared values rather than bank accounts, about using privilege to help rather than impress, about staying when things got complicated instead of running to something easier. Pierce had been a humble mechanic because he needed to remember who he was beneath the expectations. Emma had fallen for that man, the real one, and when his billionaire identity was revealed, she didn't run because the money didn't change the fundamental truth of who he was. He was still Pierce, still the man who fixed broken things and listened when she talked and made her laugh and loved her with his whole heart. And that, Emma thought as they finished their dinner and headed home to the life they'd built together, was the only story that really mattered. Not the billions or the business or the dramatic revelation. Just two people choosing each other, over and over again, for the rest of their lives. They lived happily ever after, not because everything was perfect, but because they faced imperfection together, hand in hand, heart to heart, from that first flat tire to their final days, never running, always staying, forever choosing love.